What's going on, guys? My name is Rounded TikTak and welcome back to another video. The Last Epoch servers are currently offline, but I wasn't done recording and I wanted to make this video for the masses to try and bring my flair, my style in my never-ending quest, and usually failing, to make easy to understand content for video games. ARPGs in particular are quite difficult because there's so many moving parts, but crafting in Last Epoch is a super important part of the game, and I don't want it to be a daunting task or anybody gets, they don't want to do it because they just don't understand it. It is very easy to get once you understand the basics, and I'm going to show you the basics, the beginner stuff right here. I'm going to leave out some of the advanced stuff. Maybe I'll do another video if this video does well, but I just want to put this out into the ether and allow people to have an easier time with crafting within Last Epoch. So let's jump into this. Last Epoch's crafting system is probably the fairest, if not one of the better ones I've ever played in any game. You are able, with some luck, to be able to change really anything on any piece of gear. But we're going to go over all the basics of why it works so well and how much better it is than something like D4, but just not as in-depth as something like Path of Exile that the crafting system in Last Epoch is. So let's get into it and we'll just start explaining how everything works. So if you press F, you open up your forge. Forging is technically crafting in Last Epoch. Prefixes are also known as affixes in many other games. So if I happen to misconstrue those words and use them incorrectly, please know I'm always talking about prefixes and forging an item. So let's talk about the basic stuff about crafting. And we'll start off with forging potential. Forging potential, in my opinion, is probably the most important thing within the game. Every single item within the game has forging potential. 95% of the time, the higher the rarity, the more forging potential it has. And what is forging potential? Well, it's just the amount of times you can craft on an item. Common, magic, rare, all the way up to exalted, which are purple items, all have forging potential on them, and usually exalted is the higher one with around 45 chance, 39 forging potential to be able to get exactly what you want on an item. So keep that in mind. Unlike Path of Exile, correct me if I'm wrong, you really can't take a common item and make it into some incredible legendary thing because you're just going to run out of forging potential. 13 is not a lot. In fact, you might even get unlucky and only get one craft on this Katana of Sleep. So just keep that in mind. You're always going to be looking for the higher rarity items because that allows you more chances to craft on an item. That is forging potential. Next up, let's talk about the implicits and the prefixes and the suffixes. So everything in Last Epoch has an implicit. This, for example, on these gauntlets is the 80 armor and 39 void resistance. You can hold Control and Alt to show you the range that these implicits can roll. And it also tells you the tiers of the prefixes and suffixes that you currently have on your gear. Tier 7 is the max, but that is late game stuff, which we'll talk about towards the end of the video. But just know that most things go up to tier 5. Prefixes, you can tell on the item, are usually an offensive perk. For these gloves, we have 52% increased damage over time and increased throwing attack speed. You are also aware that these are prefixes due to the tiny little white triangles to the left of the text. And suffixes are usually more utility based. Here we have critical strike avoidance, endurance. On armor, it's usually dodge rating, health, those kinds of things. So just keep that in mind. In my opinion, prefixes trump suffixes until you get to super late game. The entirety of the base game plus the start of the late game isn't difficult enough to where you need to min-max your resistances 100%. And in my opinion, have fun, do as much damage as you can, because crafting and the amount of loot dropped in this game is very generous, and you can just find a new piece of gear and you'll constantly be upgrading anyway. So those are your forging potential, that is your implicits. You can have your prefixes, your suffixes. One last thing about implicits is you cannot change them. Each piece of gear that has it, any gauntlet I find that are the same as these will always have void resistance and armor. but you can change the role within the implicit. In this case, it's called a rune of shaping, but we're not there yet, so we're not going to go over it. But just know that if this happens to be the best prefixes and suffixes for your build, but the implicits are garbage, you can just use one of these and continue on your way and hopefully be able to get a better roll. So now that we explained everything like that, let's talk about the next 3 crafting items that you are going to need to know about within Last Epoch. These are runes, shards, and glyphs. In my opinion, shards are the most important one. So we're just going to take this item right here. We're just going to stick it here just so I can show you. Actually, that's a terrible item because it's all maxed. Just so I can show you on this axe exactly what a shard does. So hypothetically, let's say we are playing a void damage build. We can then take any kind of offensive prefix that we want and just add it to this item. So you can see we have critical strike multiplier, melee void damage sounds good. So let's do that. We're going to change this to nothing at the moment. We'll talk about glyphs next. And then when we press add affix, it can cost us 1 to 18 out of the 39 forging potential. The less is always better because that allows us to craft more on this one item. So we're going to press add affix and we'll see exactly how much is this going to cost us. So we got 9 melee void damage and it cost us 9 forging potential. Now I hear you saying, but TIKTAK, how am I going to craft a weapon if it takes 9 per chance? Well, number one, a lot of times it doesn't take 9. This is a very mid roll. Most of the time you're going to hit like 1 to 3, and sometimes you'll brick your item and hit 10 3 times in a row and absolutely be upset about that situation. But just know most of the times you can add any prefix and suffix you want anywhere on the item. Just be cautious of the forging potential. Also, do note that there are rarities to prefixes and suffixes. So just because you see something on a build video or something like that doesn't mean you will have access to that shard early on in the game. This is very specific to certain, usually class-based shards. For example, here, +2 to smite gives me +2 to this skill. That is not something that will drop in the early game for you, and you have to play later into the game to get stuff like that. So just keep that in mind. There are rarities to shards, but you can add whatever suffix, whatever prefix you want on any item, as long as there's a slot there for you to do so. That is shards. Let's move on to glyphs. Glyphs, in my opinion, are the second most important thing, and specifically the Glyph of Hope. What this does, it gives you a 25% chance to not use any forging potential at all when you press upgrade affix. Let's see if I get lucky, and let's see if we can level up this melee void damage one more time. It cost us 8. Okay, this is something different. A critical success is important, and we'll talk about it in a moment, but a critical success preserves the forging potential. I'm not sure if it technically used a Glyph of Hope, like if it counted as a Glyph of Hope proc, but it also leveled up a bonus perk. I don't know what it did. I'd have to look back on the footage. I'll put it on the screen somewhere, but when you get a critical success, you get a free level in anything that can have a level. So keep that in mind. That is the best outcome possible as long as you have the perks that you want on your gear. But let's see if we can just hit this Glyph of Hope one time, and we can't. But regardless, all you need to know is that Glyph of Hope gives you a 25% chance to not use any forging potential. Now, what if you didn't want something like reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes? If we switch our glyph to a Glyph of Chaos, we can change this to any suffix available currently for this item. So as you saw the list earlier, there are a ton, but if this is a really bad perk, this is one of the better ways to be able to remove that and just gamble on something better. In my opinion, this is better done with suffixes because resistances are going to be good no matter which ones you get, and you can always change those easier than something on like a weapon, like a prefix. Like, hey, I have a void build, I have the void damage stuff that I want, but I need fire resistance. Let me roll for fire resistance and see if I can get it. The issue is you are no longer using a Glyph of Hope, and your chances to really burn through your forging potential using Glyphs of Chaos is quite high. Let's see if we can get lucky here and get something that would work for this build. Maybe something like Stun Chance. Oh, we have Stun Chance. Maybe something like Bleed on Hit. So we have Chance to Chill on Hit, which is completely useless for whatever build we're making here. And it removed the 40% reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes, and it took us 4 forging potential to change that. Please note that when you do this, you can see it says upgrade. So every time you use this, the tier of it goes up. So you only technically have 4 or 5 chances to get this to what you want it. So let's try one more time. And it took another 4, and now it gave us Bleed on Hit, which is exactly what we were looking for. So if we go over here and we go to Glyph of Hope, we could finish leveling this up and hopefully be able to nail it. The other glyph is a Glyph of Order. Modifies the outcome of a craft when upgrading an affix, prevents the roll of an affix within its range changing when it's upgraded. So this affix that we currently have is Chance to Bleed on Hit. It is tier 3 and it is a max roll of 64%. So if we use this here and we upgrade this, it'll tell us right off the bat it's going to stay at 74%, which is the max roll, instead of possibly changing when you do level it up normally. But again, you replace your Glyph of Hope here, so be wary. These forging potentials can go quite quickly. And then lastly, we have a Glyph of Despair. This is more end game stuff. Let me just grab an item and show you exactly what this can do. So a Glyph of Despair is something that can lock a stat off of these main 4 and allow you to fit 5 stats onto an item. The issue is the higher the roll is, so if it's tier 7, tier 4, tier 3, if you use a Glyph of Despair on it, the less chance you have of actually moving that perk. Glyphs of Despair can be very, very useful in a multitude of situations. Number one, you can use it to get your absolute perfect item. So hypothetically here, we have poison damage, damage over time. Those two usually work quite well together. Shock on hit is not something we need, but let's just say we want bleed on hit, or rather poison on hit, right? We can add this affix, and with a Glyph of Despair, it will automatically put it in its own tier. So as you can see, it put the chance to poison on hit in a sealed tier 1 position, and it adds a perk and still allows us to add a perk right here. Now the thing is the higher the tier of the thing is, the harder it is to seal that. So if we were to go back to an item right here and grab this tier 3 and we try to seal it, let's see exactly if we get lucky. We really got lucky there. That is super rare for it to happen, but it also ruined all of my forging potential. So it doesn't matter because I can't add anything to this anyway, because there's no forging potential. So this is a risky thing to do, but just know it is possible. That is more of a late game thing. The last thing a Glyph of Despair can do is something like this. Say on this item, I don't want health on melee hit. So I don't want to just re-roll all my chances with Glyph of Chaos. I can use a Glyph of Despair, click this. As that seals it, it frees up another spot, and I can put whatever I want on this item, make sure I take my Glyph of Hope, and continuing leveling up this item the way I want to. So it is useful for those scenarios as well, almost as a thing of removal. Speaking of removal, let's talk about the last things we have here, and those are runes. Runes are simply ways to change the outcomes of items, just like the other things. So runes here are listed here, and they are all very different. The main ones you're going to need while leveling are Runes of Shattering and Runes of Removal. Runes of Shattering allows you to basically take whatever perk or whatever prefix or suffix on the item and just shatter it, allowing you to collect it within your crafting materials. So I can press this button, shatter it, and you can see all of these shards that I get. The thing about Rune of Shattering though is that it's random. You might end up with 1 shard of void damage even though it's tier 4. So keep that in mind, but this is the easiest way to do it. The second rune we should talk about is Rune of Removal. These are a little more rare, and these allow you to just take off perks that are in or anywhere within the item. So if we take this item and we put it right here, we have 27 forging potential. We can grab a Rune of Removal, and this will remove any random affix or suffix on the item. This is very dicey to do because you can lose the one you actually want. So hypothetically here, if I want critical strike chance and I use remove an affix, I accidentally removed my critical strike chance. So that can happen. That is why I suggest rolling things with Glyph of Chaos instead of Rune of Removal. In very specific scenarios, Rune of Removal is great, but I feel like most times you end up bricking your item like this. So just be careful with Rune of Removal. The other couple of runes that we have are Rune of Refinement, rerolls the values of all affixes on an item within their tiers. This is similar to the Glyph of Hope, where you can basically reroll everything on it. We'll just use one so I can show you guys. These are, it goes up to 30, 224, and 96. And let's see, we'll reroll it and see. And we have 30, 194, and 84%. So we lost out on doing that, but you can hopefully be able to find your favorite item, and if it rolls low, you can use that. A Rune of Discovery is something very, very, I don't know, maybe useless would be the word. You really only use it at the start of the game. If you take an item from just the shop over here and you go back to the forging bench and you just stick this here, you will see that if I use a Rune of Discovery on this, it will automatically add 2 random tier 1 affixes to my item. So now that allowed me to get these 2 perks, but they're completely random. The only benefit this thing has is it does not take forging potential. So technically you could get super duper lucky and be able to get the exact item you want with just using one of these and taking 0 forging potential from you. It will never happen, but you could use it. These are decent for the early game. The next thing to talk about is Rune of Shaping, and this is what I was talking about earlier, about being able to reroll your implicits on the item. So here we have 107, 4%, and 75. 107, 7, and 75. So as you can see, they do change. Very slightly though, because this one, the only thing that can change actually is the melee critical strike chance. I didn't see that. So that is a Rune of Shaping. And then lastly, we have a Rune of Ascendance and a Rune of Creation, but we'll get there in just a second. Rune of Ascendance allows you to turn any item in the game, anything in the game, into a unique. No idea what you get, but it stays as the class that it is. So this is a 2-handed spear. So if we ascend this, we will get a unique 2-handed spear. We have Lethal Concentration, which is a poison minion kind of thing. It's not bad. It's not bad. You're not going to use these. They're, again, decent in the early game to kind of fill out what you want. If you have a very specific item you need for a build, it might not be the best roll, but at least you have the item, and you might be able to get lucky with a Rune of Ascendance. And the last thing to talk about is the Rune of Creation, which are basically, if you ever played Path of Exile, mirrors. So this would take this item, say this is an absolute perfect item. I don't want to change anything, but I would love to have another ring. This is basically used for rings, I would assume, and you just duplicate it. It takes all of your forging potential away, but you have 2 of the same ring, and that is for like absolute perfect god rolled, super lucky with your forging potential kind of stuff. That is crafting, forging in Last Epoch, the best I can explain it as quickly as possible, and making sure to hit all of the beginner things. That should allow you to get your grasp on crafting within it and be able to play and make the gear that you want specifically. The absolute last thing I want to talk about in crafting are exalted items. Exalted items are the best of the best, the cream of the crop, and they can drop with tier 7 and tier 6 perks on them. These are the items that you want to make into late game, super high corruption pushing builds. They can drop with tier 7 or tier 6 perks, and supposedly they can drop with more than one. So in this instance, I just want to show you exactly like what you would craft on this to use it as a build. Now, this isn't the absolute best item for this, but we're going to make it work because the perks that we currently have on it, if we were using some sort of poison build, would be quite strong. So we have damage over time, poison damage. We have chance to shock, which is useless for us. We sealed a tier 1 with a Glyph of Despair just to put it away so we can add another one over here. So this is guaranteed to sit at 37% chance to poison on hit. And we have 16 forging potential left. Let's change let's add this perk on, and we'll just do let's bleed on hit. Most poison damage builds also buff bleed, so we'll just grab that as well. We have our Glyph of Hope, and we're going to bump up chance to bleed as high as we can. Hopefully we get some critical successes. Hopefully we get to tier 5. Let's see how this goes. 1. We saved it. Didn't save it. And that's it. So this is a tier 20-ish item anyway, because this is a tier 7 perk. And we have one tier 1 here. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. This is a tier 19 item. You absolutely can do better, but this will carry you all the way to the entire min-max stage of the game. One thing I do want to talk to you guys about is there should be a certain order of operations for removing perks or adding perks to your thing. So hypothetically here, let's use a rune of removal. This will remove anything that we want on this. So let's see, or not anything we want, but it'll remove something before us. Let's see what it removes. It removed the bleed damage, or damage over time. Now, hypothetically, if endurance is exactly what I wanted on this item, right? I could just level this up here, and maybe I'll get a critical hit in level 1 of one of these. But technically, what you want to do is you want to add at least all of your perks to the item before you start leveling up anything specific. The reason for this is you can get really, really lucky sometimes and get critical successes just like that, and it'll increase the thing that you just added. So if you didn't have this here, you wouldn't get that free tier that I literally just got. We can try with this again and see if we get lucky. We got lucky again. So now it went up to tier 5. We saved another point, and we'll give this one more shot. And we got this all the way up to tier 3 with, I believe we had what? 8 crafting potential left. That's really, really good. So just make sure to add all of your affixes before you start leveling up anything. Thank you guys so much for watching. If this video helped you out, like, comment, share. It does help. And I will see you guys on the next one. TikTak out.